That I've been an investor for less than a year, right? So there are a lot of things that I don't know. And I've been an entrepreneur for 20 years before that, of which 10 years in cybersecurity and about 10 years in AI. And I remember landing to this AI conference, and they had just released a few months prior the GPU acceleration of training data sets, right? And I really felt like, okay, this is interesting. There are a lot of things that were happening in the academia that you couldn't see in the product, and so pretty much became, this is, I think within an hour it was obvious that this was going to be the rest of my career, and that's what happened. So my perspective is slightly different from other VCs, because I tend to invest very early in the process. When there is no product, when there is nothing, right? So the perspective of a Series A investor or Series B might be very, very different from what I look at. More often than not, we see companies that don't have data, right? That would like to start a team that would like to start a business in this space. That clearly there is no market leader, there is fragmentation, and there are all the ingredients for a great company. And because of this, because of lack of data, we tend not to invest in consumer startups in this space. Again, maybe because we invest in young entrepreneurs very early, there is a tendency to really underestimate the amount of data, right? Mm-hmm. When the internet came out and mobile came out, you were competing against incumbents that were making their first steps into this, right? This is not the case with AI, right? We are competing, my startups are competing against, say, Google, Apple, Facebook, and so forth, that they really have the upper advantage because the data needed, right, to really have error rates that are very low requires a scale that is enormous. Cheating is the only way, right? And by cheating, I don't mean like breaking law, but I mean these people play by a certain rule book, right? And you can't win on the same grounds, right? You can't win because they simply have scale. They move fast, which wasn't the case previously, right? The company that Google competed against was AltaVista, and AltaVista didn't move fast. Google learned that, right? So you can't expect now to move faster than Google. So there are a few ways, right? The first one is you go after small markets. This is where what I say that I'm very different from Series A investors, right? Series A, you really care about how big is the market. From my perspective, it's the complete opposite. It's how small is the market and what are the ways that make sure that you can build a business, a foothold in this industry without really having, Amazon breathing down your neck. And the second way is actually part of our investment thesis that we invest worldwide, is that a lot of these companies are located on the West Coast, right? And their data set are US-centric. And problem solving is US or European centric, right? And or the companies like Baidu, Tencent are Chinese centric, right? And suddenly you see that, what if your data set is not from China or the United States, right? And this is where you can get, or what local data sets, because there are public data sets, and we'll go to that later. But there are some private data sets of problem that only exist in a very specific region. So, for example, we invested in a company in Kenya, and this company in Kenya is all about collecting data for feedback on on-demand services. It's a low-trust economy. People don't really trust the rating left by other consumers, and so they need to find a way to rank them by social proximity and sort of how do you improve this, right? And this is a problem that, for example, Uber didn't have, right, when it was working in Europe or in North America. And the moment that they start opening in Africa, suddenly it's a problem, right? One is Funolabs, which is this Chinese company doing call centers, right? Okay. And they didn't have the data, right? Because the amount of data that you need to train for accent is staggering, right? It is unbelievable. And so they went to call centers, right? Because a lot of business is done by call center. And so they suddenly, in exchange of improving the process of call centers, they go to data in return, right? And now it's extremely valuable. Horizon Ventures, which is the family office of Li Ka-shing, invested, right? Invested in led the seed round, which was very unusual because they don't usually come very early. Li Ka-shing did DeepMind as well, right? And then the second one was this company called Solar Robotics. They don't have a branding person, so the name of the company was pretty self-explanatory. Mm-hmm. And where they didn't have any data as well, right? And they took the data from Kaggle, right? And their business model, right? I think was Mark Suster said, when everyone zigs, you zag, right? So everyone was working on LiDAR, right? On better LiDARs and everything. And then what they did was basically working on better software. So if you build a self-driving stack for your own startup, you spend less on LiDAR because you buy basically fewer LiDARs instead of use the software. And so, as you can imagine, a startup you're looking at $300,000 to have a full stack hardware, right? To test your thing. With our software, you take it down to 130, right? So clearly, it's an obvious solution for car makers where they don't care about so much on the money side. It's about weight and power consumption, right? Because you have a certain budget on both, and suddenly this is taken down. Right? Power consumption right now on cars is outrageous, right? I cannot see us running a self-driving cars with the current with the current hardware stack, right? That we have. So these are the perfect example that I told you up until now. Like, how do you, like, neither of these companies had data to start with, right? And they were nobodies, right? And so in one case, like going door to door to call centers. And again, the data, call centers didn't really care about the data, right? It was not proprietary, it was nothing, it's just a recording of calls. And the other guys going and taking a public data set and building a value proposition that was not about LiDARs, right? It was about removing the need for LiDARs, right? And so there are garbage data sets, but there are no garbage data sets over time, right? What I mean by this is that the tools get better, right? And so a data set that maybe was useless a year ago, right? Today, you have a better tool, right? And there are graph-based neural networks now, and all this kind of innovation that didn't exist too. Yeah, and suddenly you can look at what the data that you have, or the data you're already analyzing. Suddenly you can see a completely different dimension to it, right? And gets more interesting. The other thing, I think it's more important than, instead of looking at data set as a static thing, you have to have the data stream, like, constantly. You have to add to it, right? Because right now, machine learning is pretty stupid, right? It's all about memorization of what you're seeing, right? And so constantly having something that creates a feedback cycle, people use the product or the service and changes their behavior in some way, right? And because you need to acquire constantly new data, right? I know that in some cases it's not possible simply, right? Because you got the initial data set and then that's it. But that's really, your competitor will have a model that's been updated. And so if you don't, you're going to be left behind, right?
Right.
The other thing is that what if you don't have any of these data sets? You don't have anything, right? And because you're working on problems that were simply on a planetary scale, that there isn't enough data, right? The perfect example is people working on faults on jet turbines or nuclear reactors or wind turbines, right? Simply, we don't have, luckily, a lot of reactors going to meltdown, right? Every year, and because of it, there is no data. We have some data, but there isn't, right? And so the for these cases in which the data would be garbage from a deep learning perspective, right? Then again, you have to change the rule of the game, right? You have to look at architectures that are different. They're still machine learning, but not your standard deep learning as sold by Amazon or Google or anything, right? And there are some unorthodox architectures, right, that exist specifically to address the problem. If you look at the future of what's next in AI, you go sci-fi, zero to sci-fi within one phrase, right?
Yeah.
But you start promising, neural links and everything. It goes pretty quickly. While at the same time, you look back and we have 50 years of perceptrons, right? And this stuff is really old. And because it's really old, you have, especially in the past 20 years, you have a lot of research that went into all directions, right? And all these probes that went and investigated something that didn't work at the time, right? And I think now all this stuff that failed, right, suddenly can find a use, right? And the case of there this type of neural network called extreme learning machines, right? That work extremely well for a data set of 100 or less, right? So it's crazy, right? But they outperform deep learning because deep learning really requires scale, right? And so there are all these quirky things on the side, right? And I, since we're talking about what's next, right? I think the largest models that Microsoft and Google are rolling out have about 1 billion nodes, right? And they're going to get bigger, right? More often than not, we find that a bigger, deeper model is not necessarily better than a simpler one. But on average, we're seeing bigger and bigger, right? And we're going to get enormous. So the brain is about 10 times this size, right? So right now the problem is the algorithm, right? So we're basically overkilling the problem, right? This is why, your data set that might be garbage today might not be garbage tomorrow. Because right now we're using essentially a missile to kill fly. Simply because our missile is incredibly inefficient. So, of course, we see great entrepreneurs, so we fund them. But at Zero, the reason why we started Zero is because we want some companies to exist that they don't exist today. We want to push people to fund them, right? And by making the money available. We think humanity is facing some tremendous challenges. We think the institutions that took us there to the problem where we are, burning oil, having inefficiency and inefficient farming and basically not running the planet in a sustainable way, they will not be the companies that will solve the problem, right? And so you need new companies, right? And as a techno-optimist that I am, I think private entrepreneurship will solve this problem, right? Or at least will be part of the solution, right? Because still governments will need. And so we want to invest, particularly climate change, right? Sustainability, and really figure out a way to survive and have a similar quality of life, right? It really, on a daily basis, feels like humanity peaked, right? And our children will not have the level of wealth and resources that we're burning, right? And I think we can solve the problem, at least partially, through technology.